The crystal champagne flute shattered in my hand when I overheard my husband of 12 years and his executive assistant whispering in the shadows of my own birthday party. "Once the divorce is finalized, we'll announce our engagement," he said, not realizing I was standing just around the corner. Blood from the broken glass trickled down my fingers, but I felt nothing compared to the searing betrayal burning through my chest. What these two conspirators didn't know was that I wasn't just the trophy wife they thought I was discarding. I was about to become the CEO of Luminary Innovations, the very company where my husband and his mistress thought they were untouchable. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The evening had started perfectly, or so I thought. Our penthouse overlooking Central Park sparkled with elegant decorations for my 40th birthday celebration. The guest list included everyone who mattered in New York's financial and tech circles, a world I'd helped my husband Daniel navigate since we met at Columbia Business School 15 years ago. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs earlier. Daniel had insisted on handling all the party arrangements himself, something completely out of character for a man who typically delegated even our anniversary dinner reservations to his ever-efficient executive assistant, Vanessa Palmer. "Rebecca, you deserve to be surprised on your milestone birthday," he'd told me with that winning smile that had first caught my attention across a crowded lecture hall. "Just wear that emerald dress I bought you in Milan, and leave everything else to me." I'd been touched by his apparent thoughtfulness, interpreting it as a renewal of the attention that had gradually disappeared from our marriage. How desperately I'd wanted to believe that Daniel was finally prioritizing our relationship after years of putting Luminary Innovations first. The tech security firm he'd built from the ground up had become his true passion, consuming his nights, weekends, and eventually, it seemed, his capacity for genuine connection. The party was in full swing when I excused myself from a conversation with investors to find the powder room. Our sprawling penthouse had multiple hallways branching off from the main entertaining space, and I took the less traveled path past Daniel's home office, a route the caterers and other guests weren't using. That's when I heard their voices, hushed but clear in the relative quiet of the secluded hallway. "The prenup is solid, but I still want this handled carefully," Daniel was saying, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he used when closing business deals. "Rebecca's never shown any interest in the company's operations, but we can't risk her suddenly deciding she deserves a piece of Luminary just because she smiled at a few investors over the years." Vanessa's response came with a soft laugh that I'd never heard before, intimate, familiar. "Don't worry, I've already spoken with Jeffries. Once the papers are filed next week, we'll implement the full contingency plan. The board won't have any reason to question the transition." My heart thundered in my chest as I instinctively stepped closer to the partially open door. Through the crack, I could see them. Daniel leaning against his desk while Vanessa stood between his legs, her hand resting casually on his chest in a gesture that spoke of long-established intimacy. "I hate that we still have to pretend at her party," Vanessa continued, reaching up to straighten Daniel's custom-made tie. "But it's the last time, Daniel. Once the divorce is finalized, we'll announce our engagement, and I'll finally take my rightful place, professionally and personally." Daniel smiled, capturing her hand and kissing it. "Patience, my love. We've planned too carefully to risk everything with impulsivity now. Rebecca has her charity work and social calendar. She'll be fine with the settlement I'm offering, and she'll never understand what we're building at Luminary anyway." The crystal champagne flute I'd been carrying slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The sound froze the conspirators in place as I stepped into full view, blood from where the glass had cut my hand dripping onto the custom Italian marble threshold of the office. "Please, don't let me interrupt what is clearly the real celebration of the evening," I said, my voice steadier than I would have thought possible as shock gave way to an icy clarity. Daniel recovered first, his expression shifting from panic to the smooth, placating smile he used to diffuse tense negotiations. "Rebecca, you're misunderstanding what you've heard. Vanessa and I were discussing a sensitive corporate reorganization that coincidentally involves divorce papers, engagement announcements, and prenuptial agreements." I cut him off, watching as Vanessa took a strategic step away from Daniel, suddenly very interested in straightening papers on the desk. "I may not run a tech empire, Daniel, but I'm not stupid." "Of course you're not stupid, darling," he said, approaching me with hands extended as if calming a hysterical child. "You're just emotional right now, and hearing fragments of a complex conversation without context." "Do not darling me," I said, stepping back from his reach. Blood continued to drip from my hand, staining the cream-colored carpet that Vanessa had helped select during our recent home renovation, a detail that now took on a completely different meaning. "And do not insult my intelligence by continuing." "This charade," Vanessa finally spoke, her professional mask firmly back in place. "I should give you privacy to discuss this. Perhaps I should check on the guests." "Stay exactly where you are," I commanded, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. "If you're planning to take my place professionally and personally, as you put it, then you should be part of this conversation." Daniel's expression hardened, the charm evaporating as he recognized his carefully crafted plan was unraveling. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out, Rebecca. But perhaps it's for the best. We can discuss the details with the lawyers and avoid any unnecessary drama." "Unnecessary drama?" I repeated, a disbelieving laugh escaping me. "You orchestrated my birthday party, filled with our friends, colleagues, and business associates, as cover for planning your exit strategy with your mistress, and you're concerned about unnecessary drama?" The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled around us. In the distance, I could hear the string quartet playing and the murmur of guests enjoying what they thought was a celebration of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they toasted to my health and happiness, my marriage was dying in this soundproof office. Daniel sighed, glancing at his watch in a gesture so dismissive that something broke permanently inside me. "We should rejoin the party. We can discuss this tomorrow with clear heads and—" "There's nothing to discuss tomorrow that you haven't already decided today," I interrupted, a new resolve forming from the ashes of my shock. "But you're right about one thing. We should rejoin the party. After all, you've gone to such trouble to arrange it. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. I turned and walked out, heading to the nearest bathroom where I methodically washed the blood from my hands and applied a discreet bandage from the first aid kit. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes held a clarity and determination I hadn't seen in years. For too long, I had allowed myself to become a supporting character in Daniel's success story. The woman in the mirror reminded me that I had once had ambitions of my own before I set them aside to help build Daniel's dreams. What my husband and his mistress didn't know, what they had never bothered to discover, was that I had been quietly maintaining my professional connections over the years. While they dismissed me as merely a social asset, I had been serving on the boards of 3 tech startups, privately advising female entrepreneurs, and completing an advanced degree in digital security governance that I had initially pursued, to better understand Daniel's business. Most significantly, I had recently been approached by Lawrence Chen, the founder and outgoing CEO of Meridian Security Solutions, Luminary's biggest competitor, about potentially taking over his position when he retired. Lawrence, unlike Daniel, had recognized my strategic thinking and industry insights during the charitable foundation galas we both frequently attended. As I repaired my makeup with steady hands, a plan began to crystallize in my mind. Daniel and Vanessa thought they were dealing with a decorative, disposable wife who would quietly accept whatever settlement they deigned to offer. They had severely underestimated their opponent. I rejoined the party with a smile that revealed nothing of what had transpired. I moved through the crowd, accepting birthday wishes with gracious nods, all while my mind cataloged everyone in attendance who might become valuable allies in what I now recognized as an inevitable corporate war. "Are you enjoying your party, Mrs. Harrington?" asked Jonathan Jeffries, the very lawyer Vanessa had mentioned in their conversation, and a man I had never particularly trusted despite his long professional relationship with Daniel. "Immensely," I replied, clinking my fresh champagne glass against his. "It's amazing how revelatory birthdays can be, don't you think? They have a way of clarifying one's priorities." Jeffries shifted uncomfortably under my steady gaze. "Indeed. Milestone. Moments often inspire reflection and action," I added meaningfully before drifting away to speak with Lawrence Chen, who was conversing with several board members from Meridian. "Rebecca, radiant as always," Lawrence greeted me warmly. "Have you had a chance to consider our discussion from last week?" I smiled, aware that Daniel was watching from across the room as he performed the role of devoted husband for our guests. "Actually, Lawrence, I believe I'm ready to give you my answer. Perhaps we could meet for breakfast tomorrow to discuss the details?" Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. I had been deliberately non-committal when he first approached me, expressing doubts about whether I wanted to take on such a demanding role. "Wonderful. The Peninsula at 8:30? "Perfect," I confirmed, already envisioning Daniel's face when he discovered that his soon-to-be ex-wife was about to become the CEO of his largest competitor. The evening continued its elaborate facade, with Daniel making a touching speech about our years together and presenting me with an extravagant diamond necklace that the assembled guests oohed and awed over appropriately. I accepted it with a convincing show of delight, all while calculating how I would liquidate it to fund the first phase of what was rapidly becoming a comprehensive strategy for both personal and professional rebirth. As the last guests departed, shortly after midnight, Daniel loosened his tie and poured himself a generous scotch. Vanessa had left earlier, ostensibly to coordinate with the cleaning service scheduled for morning, though we both knew she was retreating to avoid the confrontation that hung in the air like a thundercloud. "I assume you want to talk now," Daniel said, not meeting my eyes as he swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. "Actually, no," I replied, removing the diamond necklace and placing it carefully in its velvet box on the coffee table between us. "I think you and Vanessa have done all the talking necessary. I'll be staying at the Four Seasons for the next few days while I make arrangements for a new residence." Daniel looked up, surprised by my calm demeanor. He had clearly expected tears, recriminations, perhaps even pleading. My composed response clearly unsettled him more than any emotional outburst would have. "Rebecca, be reasonable. This penthouse has 4 bedrooms. There's no need for you to leave while we sort things out. And those diamonds are yours. I don't want them back." I studied him for a moment. This man I had loved and supported for 12 years, trying to pinpoint exactly when he had become a stranger to me. "I'm not leaving because there isn't enough space, Daniel. I'm leaving because I refuse to spend another night under the same roof as someone who could orchestrate such a betrayal with such calculated precision." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I never meant to hurt you. These things just happen sometimes. Vanessa and we connect on a level that—" "Please spare me the cliches," I interrupted, gathering my purse and the overnight bag I had discreetly packed while he was saying goodnight to the final guests. "You didn't just happen to fall in love with your secretary. You didn't just happen to plan my birthday party as cover for finalizing your divorce strategy. You made deliberate choices, Daniel, every step of the way." He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before his expression hardened again. "Fine. We'll do this however you want. Jeffries will contact you tomorrow with the settlement offer. I think you'll find it's quite generous." I paused at the door, looking back at the life I was walking away from. The art we had collected together, the photographs from happier times, the space we had created that had never quite become the home I had longed for. "I'm sure I will," I said quietly. "But you should know that I won't be accepting it." Daniel's expression darkened. "Don't make this difficult, Rebecca. The prenup is airtight. You're entitled to support, but the luminary is completely protected." I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unnerve him even more than my composure. "I'm not interested in taking the luminary from you, Daniel. I have other plans." With that cryptic statement hanging in the air, I left our penthouse for the final time, the door closing behind me with a definitive click. In the elevator, I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of grief for the marriage and the life I had thought we were building. Then I straightened my shoulders, dried my eyes, and began composing a mental list of what needed to be accomplished before my breakfast meeting with Lawrence. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, Rebecca Harrington, trophy wife and social accessory, had begun her transformation into the woman who would soon remake the entire cybersecurity industry landscape. Daniel and Vanessa had no idea what they had set in motion with their whispered plans at my birthday party. But they would learn, along with everyone else who had underestimated me, exactly what I was capable of. The betrayal still burned, a hollowness in my chest that I suspected would remain for some time. But alongside it, something new was taking root, a sense of purpose and determination I hadn't felt since my ambitious days at Columbia, before I had sublimated my own dreams to support Daniel's. As I stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, I realized with startling clarity that while the end of my marriage was painful, it might also be the making of me. The Peninsula Hotel restaurant exudes quiet luxury, the kind designed to make power. Players feel comfortably inconspicuous as they negotiate deals over perfectly prepared eggs Benedict and French press coffee. I arrived 15 minutes early for my breakfast with Lawrence Chen, determined to project the confidence and composure of someone who hadn't had her world shattered less than 12 hours earlier. "Mrs. Harrington, welcome," the hostess greeted me with practiced warmth. "Mr. Chen called to say he's running a few minutes behind schedule but has reserved his usual table for you." Perfect. The extra time would allow me to organize my thoughts and review the mental list of conditions I'd developed during a mostly sleepless night at the Four Seasons. I ordered a double espresso and water, watching as the restaurant gradually filled, with Manhattan's elite, finance executives, media moguls, and tech entrepreneurs, all conducting their morning business with hushed intensity. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Jeffries will call you at 10 a.m. to discuss settlement terms. Please be reasonable, Rebecca." I switched my phone to silent and slipped it back into my purse without responding. Daniel still believed this was a negotiation, that I could be managed, placated, and ultimately dismissed with the right financial package. His fundamental misunderstanding of my character would be his undoing. "Rebecca, forgive my tardiness," Lawrence said, appearing at my table with his characteristic energy. At 68, the founder of Meridian Security Solutions maintained the vitality of someone 20 years younger, his keen eyes missing nothing as he assessed my appearance. "You look remarkably composed for someone who just hosted a major social event." If only he knew. "I've always recovered quickly," I replied, with a small smile. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." Lawrence signaled for coffee before leaning forward, his expression shifting to the focused intensity I'd observed when he discussed business. "I was pleasantly surprised by your message last night. You've been non-committal about the CEO position for months." "I've had a revelation about my priorities," I said carefully. "Let's just say I've realized it's time to fully utilize my capabilities, rather than continuing to support others in achieving their ambitions." Something in my tone must have revealed more than my words, because Lawrence's eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. And does this revelation have anything to do with Daniel?" I considered my response carefully. Lawrence and Daniel moved in the same professional circles, though their companies were fierce competitors. Revealing too much about my personal situation could create complications, but providing no context might make my sudden interest in the CEO position seem suspiciously capricious. Daniel and I are separating, I said simply. It's been coming for some time, though the timing has only recently been clarified. But my interest in Meridian is professional, not personal. I believe I can lead the company into areas Daniel has consistently overlooked. Lawrence nodded slowly, neither offering condolences nor asking for details, one of the qualities I'd always appreciated about him. You mentioned on previous occasions that you felt Luminary had vulnerabilities in their approach to certain markets. Yes, I confirmed, grateful for the shift to business matters. Daniel has always prioritized government contracts and financial sector clients. He's built Luminary's infrastructure around the needs of those high-value, high-security customers, a strategy that's served them well, Lawrence noted. They've dominated those sectors for years. At the expense of the broader market, I countered, warming to the subject. There's an enormous, untapped opportunity in mid-sized businesses that need sophisticated security solutions, but can't afford Luminary's premium pricing structure. Additionally, Daniel has consistently dismissed the consumer security market as unprofitable, despite growing evidence to the contrary. Lawrence smiled, slightly, the expression of a chess player who recognizes a complementary strategic mind. And you believe Meridian should move aggressively into those spaces. I believe Meridian is perfectly positioned to do so, I clarified. Your core technology is as robust as Luminary's, but your infrastructure is more adaptable. You've cultivated a corporate culture that values innovation over tradition. And unlike Daniel, you've never dismissed smaller markets as beneath your attention. The waiter arrived with our breakfast, providing a natural pause in the conversation. I realized I was genuinely hungry, the adrenaline of the past 12 hours having burned through whatever calories I'd managed to consume at my own birthday party. As we ate, Lawrence outlined Meridian's current position, their strengths, challenges, and the board's vision for the company's future. I listened attentively, mentally cataloging areas where my knowledge of Luminary's operations might provide strategic advantages. The board is unanimous in wanting you for this position, Lawrence said finally, setting aside his empty coffee cup. Your background in both business strategy and cybersecurity governance is precisely the combination we need. The question is whether you're prepared to take on a role that will inevitably put you in direct competition with your husband. Soon-to-be ex-husband, I corrected him. And yes, I'm more than prepared for that reality. In fact, I welcome it. Lawrence studied me for a moment, perhaps recognizing the steel beneath my composed exterior. May I ask what changed? When we last discussed this position, you expressed concern about potential conflicts with your marriage. I took a sip of water, buying myself a moment to frame my response honestly without revealing the humiliating details of what had transpired. Let's just say that Daniel has made it abundantly clear that he no longer considers our marriage a priority. He's apparently been planning an exit strategy for some time, with his executive assistant playing a key role in both personal and professional capacities. Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. I see. I'm sorry for the personal distress that must cause. But from Meridian's perspective, your newfound freedom to pursue this role is fortuitous timing. For me as well, I agreed. Though I do have several conditions that would need to be met before I could accept the position. Of course. What are you looking for? I outlined my requirements: complete autonomy in restructuring the executive team, a significant equity stake in the company, rather than just salary compensation, and a guaranteed minimum 3-year contract, regardless of initial market reactions to my appointment. The equity stake is standard for a CEO position, Lawrence acknowledged. The autonomy and team building shouldn't be an issue given that several key executives are retiring alongside me. The 3-year guarantee might raise eyebrows with some board members, but I believe I can persuade them given your unique qualifications. There's one more thing, I added, meeting his gaze directly. I want the announcement of my appointment to be made immediately, before rumors of my separation from Daniel become public. I want the market and industry to view me as Rebecca Harrington, new CEO of Meridian Security Solutions, not as Daniel Harrington's soon-to-be ex-wife. Lawrence nodded slowly, understanding the strategic importance of controlling this narrative. That's sensible from both a personal and business perspective. We've been planning to announce my retirement next week. We could accelerate that timeline and announce the transition of leadership by tomorrow morning if the paperwork can be expedited. It can, I assured him, mentally calculating the sequence of events that would need to unfold. I'll clear my schedule today for whatever meetings are necessary with the board and legal team. As we wrapped up breakfast, Lawrence extended his hand across the table. Welcome to Meridian, Rebecca. I have a feeling this partnership is going to reshape our industry. I shook his hand firmly, feeling for the first time since overhearing that devastating conversation at my birthday party that I was taking control of my own narrative. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Lawrence. By the time I returned to my hotel suite, 3 voicemails from Daniel awaited me, each more irritated than the last. The final one contained an unmistakable note of patronizing concern. Rebecca, this isn't like you. Jeffries has been trying to reach you all morning. We've prepared a very generous settlement package, but we need to move quickly to avoid unnecessary complications. Call me back. I deleted the messages without responding and turned my attention to preparing for my meetings with Meridian's board. My phone rang again, Daniel, again, but I silenced it and set it aside. Let him wonder. Let him worry. His assumptions about my predictability would be the first of many miscalculations. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, legal discussions, and strategic planning sessions. Meridian's board, composed primarily of tech industry veterans and 2 former government cybersecurity officials, subjected me to rigorous questioning about my vision for the company, my technical knowledge, and my readiness to take the helm of a publicly traded corporation. You must be aware that your connection to Daniel Harrington will raise questions, said Elaine Winters, the board's most senior member, her penetrating gaze assessing my reaction. The industry will speculate about whether this appointment represents a personal rather than professional decision. I expect nothing less, I acknowledged, meeting her eyes directly. But speculation will be quickly overshadowed by results. My knowledge of the competitive landscape, including Luminary's blind spots, provides Meridian with an unprecedented opportunity to capture market share in sectors that Daniel has consistently overlooked. By 6 p.m., the agreements were signed. I would officially become CEO of Meridian Security Solutions effective immediately, with a public announcement scheduled for 8 a.m. the following morning. As I signed the final document, a profound sense of rightness settled over me. I had spent 12 years helping Daniel build his empire. Now I would build my own. I returned to the Four Seasons to find a package waiting for me, divorce papers delivered by courier, along with a settlement offer that was indeed generous by conventional standards. I set them aside unopened. Daniel's timetable was no longer my concern. Instead, I spent the evening preparing for my first day as CEO, reviewing Meridian's organizational structure, recent performance metrics, and product development pipeline. When I finally climbed into bed shortly after midnight, exhaustion claimed me within minutes, providing the first dreamless sleep I'd experienced since the fateful birthday party. The next morning, I awoke to the news alert I had been anticipating. Breaking, Lawrence Chen steps down as Meridian CEO, names Rebecca Harrington as successor. The accompanying article included a formal statement from Lawrence praising my strategic vision and technological expertise, with no mention of my personal connection to Luminary's CEO. My phone immediately began buzzing with messages. Congratulations! From professional acquaintances, interview requests from tech journalists, and predictably, a terse text from Daniel. We need to talk, now. I ignored his message and focused on responding to the professional communications, saving the most important call for last, to my sister, Catherine, the only person who had genuinely supported my career ambitions even after I had seemingly abandoned them for marriage. "I just saw the news," she said instead of hello, excitement evident in her voice. "This is brilliant, Becca. But the timing. Does this have something to do with Daniel?" "Everything and nothing," I replied, grateful for her intuitive understanding. "He and Vanessa have been planning to divorce me. I overheard them discussing it at my birthday party." Catherine's sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of colorful expletives. "That absolute bastard. And his secretary? Could he possibly be more cliché?" "Executive assistant?" I corrected automatically, then laughed at the absurdity of the distinction. "And apparently they've been orchestrating this for some time. She's set to take a significant role at Luminary once I'm out of the picture." "Well, this CEO announcement certainly throws a wrench into their neat little plan," Catherine observed. "Daniel must be apoplectic." "I wouldn't know. I haven't spoken to him since I left the penthouse after the party." "Good. Let him stew." I could hear the fierce protectiveness in my sister's voice. "So what's your strategy now? Besides running? Circles around him professionally, I mean." I smiled at her assumption that I already had a comprehensive plan in place. "For now, I'm focused on establishing my leadership at Meridian. The personal reckoning with Daniel can wait." But as I said it, I knew that the professional and personal were inevitably intertwined. Daniel wouldn't accept this development quietly. His ego wouldn't allow it. My appointment at Meridian wouldn't just complicate his divorce plans, it would represent a direct challenge to his carefully constructed self-image as the superior strategic mind in our relationship. The car Meridian had sent arrived at precisely 7:30 a.m. to take me to their headquarters in Midtown. I had selected my outfit with meticulous care, a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without seeming to try too hard, paired with the subtle ruby earrings Catherine had given me for my 35th birthday. No wedding ring, no Harrington, family jewelry that Daniel had presented over the years. Today marked the beginning of a new identity. Meridian's headquarters occupied 15 floors of a sleek glass tower on Madison Avenue. Unlike Luminary's aggressively modern, almost sterile aesthetic, Meridian's offices featured warm wood tones and thoughtfully designed collaborative spaces interspersed with the necessary security features of a cybersecurity firm. Lawrence met me in the lobby, his presence intended to physically symbolize the passing of leadership. "Ready to meet your team?" he asked with an encouraging smile. "Absolutely," I replied, following him through the security protocols and into a private elevator. As we rode to the executive floor, Lawrence briefed me on the day's schedule, a company-wide announcement at 9 a.m., followed by meetings with department heads, a strategy session with the product development team, and a late afternoon conference call with major clients to reassure them about the leadership transition. "One thing you should be prepared for," Lawrence added as the elevator neared our destination. "The press is already speculating about your connection to Daniel. The business channels are running with a competitive angle." I nodded, unsurprised. "And the tabloids?" "Predictably focused on the personal dimension. Your marriage has been featured in enough society pages over the years to make this irresistible to them." "Let them speculate," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We'll give them something more substantive to discuss once we announce our new market strategy." The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area where Meridian's executive team waited to greet their new CEO. I recognized most of them from industry events, though I'd previously interacted with them only in my capacity as Daniel's wife. "Welcome to Meridian, Ms. Harrington," said Michael Torres, the chief technology officer, extending his hand. I noted his deliberate use of my title rather than Mrs. Harrington, a small but significant acknowledgement of my changed status. "Thank you, Michael. I'm looking forward to diving into the quantum encryption project you presented at the CyberSec conference last month," I replied, watching his expression shift from polite welcome to genuine interest as he realized I was familiar with his work. 1. By one, I greeted each executive, making sure to reference specific projects or initiatives they had championed, demonstrating that I was approaching this role having done thorough research rather than trading on my connection to Daniel. The company-wide announcement went smoothly, with Lawrence formally introducing me to the assembled employees in the main auditorium and via video link to Meridian's satellite offices. I kept my remarks brief but substantive, outlining my vision for expanding Meridian's reach into underserved markets while maintaining their reputation for technological excellence. While other companies in our space have focused exclusively on high-end enterprise and government contracts, I said, making no direct reference to Luminary but ensuring the comparison was clear, Meridian has an opportunity to democratize cybersecurity, making sophisticated protection accessible to smaller organizations and even individuals who face increasingly complex threats. As I concluded my address and the employees dispersed to their respective departments, my executive assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Zoe, who had been with Meridian for 5 years, approached with a tablet in hand. "You have 17 media requests for interviews," she informed me. "And Mr. Harrington has called the office 3 times already." I smiled at her deliberate neutrality in referring to Daniel. "Thank you, Zoe. Please prioritize the media requests by reach and relevance to our target markets. We'll begin responses tomorrow after I've had a full day with the team. As for Mr. Harrington, please inform him that I'm in meetings all day and will return his call when my schedule permits." "Of course," she replied with just the faintest hint of approval in her tone. "Also, the legal team has requested time this afternoon to discuss some confidentiality matters regarding your previous connections." I nodded, appreciating her tactful handling of the delicate situation. "Schedule them for 2 p.m., please. And Zoe, I realize this transition brings some unique complications. I appreciate your professionalism. It's my job," she said simply, but with a small smile that suggested she might become an ally rather than merely an efficient assistant. The morning progressed with a series of department meetings, each one providing greater insight into Meridian's operations and the challenges they faced in competing with larger firms like Luminary. I was impressed by the caliber of talent Lawrence had assembled, innovative thinkers who had sometimes been overlooked by more established companies. During a brief break between meetings, I glanced at my phone to find multiple missed calls from Daniel, 2 voicemails, and a text message that simply read, "This is childish and unprofessional. Call me immediately." I deleted everything without listening or responding. Daniel was used to people, especially me, accommodating his schedule, his priorities, his demands. That dynamic had ended the moment I'd overheard him and Vanessa plotting at my birthday party. At lunch, meeting with the product development team in Meridian's sleek conference room, I outlined my vision for expanding their consumer-focused security solutions. Luminary has consistently dismissed this market as unprofitable, I explained, but their analysis is fundamentally flawed. They're looking at consumer cybersecurity through the lens of their enterprise model, which creates enormous overhead. "Exactly," exclaimed Sophia Chen, the brilliant young engineer who headed consumer products. "We've developed a scalable architecture that could deliver enterprise-grade protection at an accessible price point, but we've been struggling to get marketing resources allocated to this division." "That changes today," I assured her. "I want a comprehensive go-to-market strategy on my desk by the end of the week. We're going to move aggressively into this space while our competitors are still debating whether it's worth their attention." The energy in the room was palpable as the team realized their previously sidelined projects were suddenly central to the company's strategy. This, I reflected, was the kind of leadership I had always wanted to provide, identifying underutilized talent and giving them the resources and authority to innovate. My meeting with Meridian's legal team proved both necessary and enlightening. The chief counsel, a meticulous woman named Vivian Roth, had prepared a comprehensive analysis of potential conflicts arising from my marriage to Daniel. While your non-disclosure agreements with Luminary expired 3 years ago, she explained, there are still gray areas regarding information you may have gained as Mr. Harrington's spouse rather than as an employee. I understand the concern, I acknowledged. I have no intention of using any confidential information obtained through my marriage. My strategy for Meridian is based on identifying market opportunities that Luminary has deliberately chosen to ignore, not on proprietary technology or client information. Vivian nodded. Nevertheless, we should document this conversation and establish clear protocols for situations where potential conflicts might arise. Additionally, we should prepare for the possibility that Luminary might file a nuisance lawsuit alleging trade secret misappropriation, regardless of merit. Daniel wouldn't risk the public relations damage, I said, then reconsidered. Actually, strike that. His ego might override his business sense if he feels sufficiently threatened. Let's prepare for that contingency. By the end of my first day, as CEO, I had met with every department head, addressed the entire company, and begun laying the groundwork for Meridian's new strategic direction. As Lawrence and I debriefed in what was now my office, he seemed pleased with how quickly I had established my authority. You've made quite an impression, he observed. The team is energized in a way I haven't seen in months. They just needed someone to recognize their potential, I replied, reviewing the notes Zoe had compiled from the day's meetings. Meridian has all the elements needed to significantly challenge Luminary in multiple markets. The pieces just need to be aligned properly. Lawrence studied me with a thoughtful expression. May I offer one piece of unsolicited advice? Of course. Don't make this personal, he said gently. I understand the circumstances that brought you to Meridian involve profound personal betrayal. But the most effective revenge against Daniel won't be driven by emotion. It will come from clear-headed, strategic decisions that benefit Meridian and its shareholders. I considered his words carefully. You're right, I acknowledged finally. This isn't about hurting Daniel. It's about building something better than what he created. Thank you for the reminder. As I left Meridian's offices that evening, I felt a curious blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been demanding, but for the first time in years, I was channeling my abilities toward my own vision rather than supporting someone else's ambitions. My driver was just pulling away from the curb when a familiar black Aston Martin cut in front of us, forcing us to brake suddenly. Daniel emerged from the sports car, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, his expression thunderous. Really, Rebecca? He demanded, approaching my car window. You couldn't return a single call? I had to hear about your new position from Bloomberg? I instructed my driver to remain where we were and lowered the window just enough to speak. I've been in meetings all day, Daniel. Some of us take our professional responsibilities seriously. This is childish, he hissed, leaning closer. You're deliberately trying to complicate our divorce proceedings. If this is a negotiating tactic, not everything is about you, I interrupted coldly. My accepting the CEO position at Meridian has nothing to do with our divorce and everything to do with my professional capabilities. Capabilities you've consistently undermined and dismissed throughout our marriage. Capabilities? He repeated, incredulously. You've never run anything more complex than our household social calendar. This is clearly Lawrence's attempt to gain insider information about Luminary's operations. I smiled thinly, unsurprised by his assumption that I could only be valuable as a source of information about him. Your limited perception of my abilities is your problem, not mine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to prepare for tomorrow. This isn't over, Rebecca, he warned, stepping back from the car. Jeffries will be contacting your attorneys. Your actions have consequences. So do yours, I replied, then signaled to my driver to continue. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Daniel in the side mirror, standing on the sidewalk looking uncharacteristically uncertain, a man watching, carefully laid plans disintegrate before his eyes. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Saw your announcement press conference. You looked like a complete badass. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate? For the first time since my birthday party, I felt genuine happiness bubbling up. Absolutely, I replied. I have stories to tell. 3 weeks into my tenure as Meridian CEO, the initial media frenzy surrounding my appointment had begun to subside, replaced by growing industry interest in our aggressive new market strategy. I had given select interviews to technology and business publications, carefully steering conversations toward Meridian's innovations rather than my personal connection to Luminary's CEO. The Wall Street Journal had been particularly astute in their analysis. Harrington brings to Meridian not just intimate knowledge of her competitors' blind spots, but a visionary approach to democratizing cybersecurity that challenges industry assumptions about which markets are worth pursuing. Daniel, meanwhile, had shifted from disbelief to barely contained fury as the implications of my new position became clear. His initial attempts to contact me directly had given way to increasingly hostile legal maneuvers, with Jeffries sending daily communications to my divorce attorney demanding immediate resolution of our separation agreement. He's getting desperate, my lawyer, Diane Matsuda, observed during our weekly update meeting in my Meridian office. The settlement offer has increased by 20% since you took this position, and they've added a non-competition clause. That would require you to step down from Meridian. I laughed without humor. I assume you told them where they could file that particular clause? Diane smiled, her precisely bob swinging as she nodded. In more professional terms, yes. But Rebecca, you should be prepared for increasingly aggressive tactics. Jeffries has hinted that they're preparing to contest the prenuptial agreement on grounds that you've violated its confidentiality provisions. Let them try, I replied calmly, handing her a folder from my desk. Here are copies of all non-disclosure agreements I signed with Luminary, along with documentation showing their expiration dates. And here, I added, sliding over a second file, is evidence that Daniel himself disclosed more proprietary information at social events than I ever have in my professional capacity. Diane raised an eyebrow as she reviewed the documents. You've been preparing for this possibility for some time. I've been married to Daniel for 12 years, I said simply. I know how he operates when he feels threatened. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Zoe entered with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Michael Torres needs to see you immediately. He says it's urgent. I excused myself from Diane and found Michael waiting. In the adjacent conference room, his normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. We've detected an unusual pattern of probes against our network, he said without preamble. Sophisticated, targeted attempts to identify vulnerabilities in our customer data infrastructure? A competitor? I asked, immediately alert. Michael's expression was grim. The attack patterns match Luminary's proprietary penetration testing methodology. I felt a cold certainty settle in my stomach. You're saying Luminary is attempting to breach our security? Not exactly, Michael clarified. These aren't actual breach attempts, they're reconnaissance. Someone is mapping our defenses, looking for weaknesses they could potentially exploit later. And you're certain it's Luminary? He nodded. The digital fingerprints are unmistakable. We've studied their methodology extensively. It's one of the most sophisticated in the industry, but they've made no attempt to hide their traces, which is unusual. They want us to know it's them, I murmured, understanding Dawn. It's a warning shot. That would be my assessment, Michael agreed. The question is, what are they warning us about? I didn't need to speculate. I knew exactly what had triggered this escalation. 2 days earlier, Meridian had announced a new, small business security solution priced at exactly 40% below Luminary's comparable product, directly targeting a market segment Daniel had always considered securely his. The product had been in development before my arrival, but I had accelerated its launch and approved an aggressive pricing strategy. Have we been compromised in any way? I asked. No. Our countermeasures intercepted all probes. But they were thorough, testing every potential entry point. If this was meant as intimidation, they put significant resources behind it. I thanked Michael for the information and asked him to implement our highest security protocols while maintaining detailed logs of any further intrusion attempts. After he left, I remained in the conference room, considering the implications of Daniel's tactics. This wasn't just business. It was personal. Daniel wasn't merely responding to a competitive threat. He was lashing out at me specifically, attempting to shake my confidence in my ability to protect Meridian from Luminary's superior resources. What he failed to understand was that every aggressive move only strengthened my resolve and validated my decision to accept the CEO position. Daniel thought he was demonstrating his power. In reality, he was revealing his fear. I returned to my office to find Diane reviewing the final documents from our meeting. "Everything all right?" she asked, noting my expression. "Luminary has been probing our network security," I informed her. "Not an actual attack, but a clear message that they could if they wanted to." Diane's expression hardened. "That's walking a very fine legal line. Would you like me to prepare a cease and desist?" I considered the option briefly before shaking my head. "Not yet. Document everything, but let's not show our hand immediately. I have a different approach in mind." After Diane left, I called an emergency meeting with my executive team to outline a new initiative. Effective immediately, we're launching a comprehensive security audit service targeted specifically at Luminary's small and mid-sized clients, I announced to the assembled leadership. "You want to poach their customers directly?" asked Rachel Winters, our chief marketing officer, looking both surprised and intrigued. "I want to offer them a valuable service," I corrected. Luminary's recent focus on expanding their government contracts has left their smaller clients vulnerable to emerging threats. We're going to demonstrate exactly how vulnerable we are by offering free security assessments that highlight the gaps in Luminary's protective coverage. Michael Torres leaned forward. "We could develop a specialized diagnostic tool that specifically identifies known weaknesses in Luminary's security architecture, areas where they've chosen cost efficiency over comprehensive protection." "Exactly," I nodded. "The tool should be sophisticated enough to provide genuine value while clearly demonstrating why Meridian's approach is superior for these particular clients." "This is aggressive," noted our chief financial officer, James Parsons, though his tone suggested admiration rather than concern. "It's responsive," I countered. "Luminary initiated hostilities by probing our network. We're simply demonstrating that the best defense is a superior market strategy." The team dispersed with a new energy, invigorated by the direct competitive challenge. I remained in the conference room, reviewing the quarterly projections that had been prepared before my arrival at Meridian. The numbers were solid but conservative, reflecting Lawrence's cautious approach in his final years before retirement. My strategy would push Meridian into uncharted territory, potentially risking short-term profitability for longer-term market position. It was a calculated gamble, but one I believed was necessary to capitalize on the window of opportunity created by Daniel's divided attention between Luminary's operations and our increasingly contentious divorce. That evening, I met Catherine for dinner at a small Japanese restaurant in Tribeca, far from the midtown establishments Daniel and I had frequented during our marriage. "You look different," she observed as we settled into our corner table. "More like the Becca I remember from business school, before you started tempering your ambitions to accommodate Daniel's ego." I smiled, recognizing the truth in her assessment. "I feel different. It's exhausting and exhilarating all at once." "And how's our friend Daniel handling your transformation?" she asked, her tone deliberately casual, though her eyes gleamed with interest. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied, summarizing the network probing incident and my strategic response. "He's used to being the aggressor in business situations. He doesn't know how to process being challenged on multiple fronts simultaneously. Catherine raised her sake cup in a toast. To Daniel's continuing education. We clinked cups, and I felt a sudden rush of gratitude for my sister's unwavering support. While I had been constructing the perfect corporate wife persona for Daniel's benefit, Catherine had consistently reminded me of the ambitious, strategic thinker I'd been before marriage, had redirected my energies. "There's something I haven't told you," I said after a moment. "Something I discovered during the security assessment of Meridian Systems when I took over." Catherine leaned forward, instantly alert to the serious shift in my tone. "What is it?" "Luminary has been systematically overbilling government contracts for the past 3 years," I said quietly. "Not dramatically enough to trigger automatic audits, but consistently enough that the cumulative amount exceeds $40 million. Her eyes widened. "How did you discover this from Meridian Systems?" "I didn't. Not directly. But Meridian handles security for 3 oversight agencies that monitor government contracts. While reviewing their threat assessments, I noticed patterns in the data that seemed familiar from conversations I'd overheard between Daniel and his federal contracts. Team, and you're certain it's deliberate fraud, not accounting errors?" I nodded grimly. "The pattern is too consistent. The amounts too precisely calculated to avoid detection thresholds. This isn't accidental." Catherine set down her chopsticks, her expression serious. "What are you going to do with this information?" It was the question I'd been wrestling with since making the discovery. The evidence wasn't definitive enough to take directly to authorities, but it provided a powerful leverage point, one that could potentially destroy Luminary entirely if fully investigated. "For now, nothing," I admitted. "I'm still gathering information, confirming my suspicions before deciding on a course of action. Because despite everything, you're not sure you want to completely destroy Daniel?" Catherine's question held no judgment, only understanding. I considered her words carefully. "It's not about protecting Daniel. It's about making the right decision for the right reasons. If I move against Luminary with this information, it needs to be a strategic business decision for Meridian's benefit, not an act of personal vengeance." Catherine studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You've really stepped into the CEO role, haven't you? Thinking about shareholders and corporate responsibility rather than just settling personal scores. Don't mistake caution for forgiveness," I clarified. "I haven't forgotten what Daniel and Vanessa did, but Lawrence gave me some valuable advice on my first day. The most effective revenge won't come from emotional reactions, but from clear-headed strategic decisions." "Wise man," Catherine acknowledged. "Though I wouldn't object if those clear-headed, strategic decisions happened to make Daniel and his secretary's lives particularly difficult." I laughed, feeling some of the tension ease. "That would be a fortunate coincidence, wouldn't it?" Our conversation shifted to lighter topics for the remainder of dinner. But the question of how to handle the contract fraud information remained at the back of my mind. It represented a nuclear option, one that could irrevocably alter not just Daniel's future, but potentially the entire competitive landscape of our industry. The next morning brought news that made my decision considerably more complicated. Zoe entered my office with the daily media briefing and a concerned expression. "Luminary has just announced a new executive appointment," she said, handing me a press release. "Vanessa Palmer has been named Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately." I scanned the document, a surge of disgust rising as I read Daniel's effusive praise for Vanessa's exceptional operational expertise and strategic vision. The announcement included a glossy professional photograph of Vanessa looking polished and confident, a sharp contrast to the woman who had been straightening papers on Daniel's desk when I caught them plotting at my birthday party. "The timing is interesting," I noted, keeping my voice neutral despite the churning in my stomach. "Just 3 weeks after I joined Meridian." "There's more," Zoe continued, her tone suggesting she knew exactly how personal this news was for me. TechCrunch is reporting that Luminary is preparing to announce a significant acquisition. They're buying next-gen security, specifically their consumer protection division. This news was genuinely surprising. Daniel had consistently dismissed the consumer market as too fragmented and price-sensitive to be profitable. NextGen's consumer division was widely respected for its user-friendly security solutions, but it had struggled to scale effectively against larger competitors. "He's directly countering our strategy," I murmured, understanding dawning. "We announce a push into consumer markets, and suddenly he's acquiring one of the leading players in that space." "It appears so," Zoe agreed. "The article suggests the acquisition has been finalized very quickly, possibly in response to Meridian's recent market repositioning." I leaned back in my chair, processing this development. Daniel wasn't just reacting emotionally. He was making calculated business moves to undermine Meridian's strategy. The Daniel I knew would never have pursued the consumer market unless he felt genuinely threatened by our incursion into what he considered his territory. "Thank you, Zoe. Please ask the executive team to clear their schedules for an emergency meeting at 10 a.m. Once alone, I allowed myself a moment of pure frustration. Daniel was using Luminary's superior resources to quickly counter each strategic move Meridian made. The promotion of Vanessa was clearly meant as a personal affront, a public confirmation of their relationship, and her ascension to a role that placed her second only to Daniel in Luminary's hierarchy. By the time the executive team assembled in the conference room, I had composed myself and developed a preliminary response strategy. I outlined the developments at Luminary, making no reference to my personal connection to either announcement. "They're responding to our moves faster than anticipated," I concluded. "The next-gen acquisition indicates that Luminary's leadership views our expansion into the consumer market as a genuine threat." "It's a defensive acquisition," Michael Torres observed. "They're paying a premium to block our strategy rather than because they genuinely value NextGen's technology." "Exactly," I agreed, "which creates both a challenge and an opportunity for us. Luminary will struggle to integrate NextGen's consumer-focused approach with their enterprise-centric infrastructure. There will be cultural and technological friction we can exploit." "We need to accelerate our consumer product launch," suggested Sophia Chen. "Get our solution to market before they can fully integrate NextGen's offerings. And we need to target NextGen's existing customer base directly," added Rachel Winters. "Offer migration incentives before Luminary can solidify those relationships." I nodded, impressed with how quickly the team was adapting to this new competitive landscape. Both excellent strategies. But we also need to recognize that Luminary is likely to make additional defensive moves. They have deeper pockets and can afford to make acquisition mistakes that would be catastrophic for a company our size. James Parsons, our CFO, looked concerned. "If we're entering an escalating battle with Luminary, we need to consider our financial runway. We don't have their resources for a prolonged conflict." "You're right," I acknowledged, "which is why we won't compete with them directly on resources. We'll focus on agility, innovation, and precision targeting of their vulnerabilities." As the meeting progressed, we developed a comprehensive response strategy that played to Meridian's strengths, while acknowledging our limitations. The team was energized by the challenge, viewing Luminary's aggressive response as validation of our strategic direction. When the meeting concluded, Michael Torres remained behind, his expression thoughtful. "There's another way to interpret Luminary's moves," he said once we were alone. "I'm listening." "They're scared," he said simply. "These aren't the actions of a confident market leader. They're rushing major acquisitions, promoting inexperienced executives to critical roles, and actively probing competitors' defenses. That's panic behavior." I considered his assessment, finding it aligned with my own observations. "I think you're right. The question is, what's driving that fear? Is it our strategy specifically, or something else?" Michael hesitated before responding. "Permission to speak frankly?" about matters that might be considered personal? I nodded, appreciating his discretion. Go ahead. From an outside perspective, it appears that Daniel Harrington is making decisions driven by ego rather than sound business strategy. He's reacting to you personally, using Luminary's resources to wage what looks increasingly like a vendetta rather than rational competitive positioning. And that creates vulnerability, I concluded, following his reasoning. Exactly. Markets eventually punish emotional decision-making, especially when it involves overpaying for acquisitions or promoting underqualified executives to key positions. As Michael left, I turned to the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline, as I processed his insights. Daniel was indeed making decisions clouded by personal animosity, the very mistake Lawrence had warned me against on my first day as CEO. The irony wasn't lost on me. In his determination to counter my every move, to demonstrate his superior business acumen, Daniel was creating precisely the openings that would allow Meridian to gain ground against Luminary. His ego had always been his blind spot, a weakness I had observed but never exploited during our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We should talk. Neutral ground. Important business matters. D. After 3 weeks of legal intermediaries and public posturing, Daniel was suddenly seeking direct contact. The timing, immediately following Vanessa's promotion announcement, suggested this wasn't about our divorce, but something else entirely. I considered ignoring the message, but decided against it. If Daniel was reaching out directly, despite his pride and the increasingly adversarial nature of our divorce, it likely indicated something significant. Knowledge, as I had learned throughout my career, was power. Even knowledge that came from uncomfortable sources. I texted back a single word when. His response came immediately. Tonight, 8 p.m., the Standard Grill. The choice of venue was interesting. A restaurant we'd never frequented together, in the meatpacking district far from our usual midtown haunts. Neutral territory indeed, I confirmed the time and returned to my work, but found my mind continually circling back to the upcoming meeting. What could be important enough for Daniel to seek face-to-face contact after weeks of communicating exclusively through lawyers? Was it a legitimate business matter or another attempt to manipulate me? Only one way to find out. The Standard Grill hummed with the energetic buzz of Manhattan's elite, unwinding over cocktails and carefully plated cuisine. I arrived precisely 5 minutes late, not enough to be rude, but sufficient to establish that I wouldn't be waiting anxiously for Daniel, as I had so many times during our marriage. I spotted him immediately at a corner table, his attention focused on the amber liquid in his tumbler. He looked tired in a way I'd rarely seen before, the impeccable facade showing hairline cracks that would be imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent 12 years studying his expressions. The maitre d' guided me to the table, and Daniel rose. As I approached, a gesture of ingrained courtesy that seemed oddly formal given our circumstances. "Rebecca," he greeted me, neither warm nor cold. "Thank you for coming." "You indicated it was important," I replied, taking my seat and declining his attempt to help with my chair. "Though I confess, I'm curious why you've suddenly decided direct. Communication is necessary after weeks of letting Jeffries handle everything." A server appeared to take my drink order, a dry martini, something I rarely ordered when with Daniel, who had always made subtle but pointed comments about hard liquor being unladylike. "Congratulations on Vanessa's promotion," I said when the server departed, deciding to address the elephant in the room directly. "Chief Operating Officer, quite a leap from executive assistant. Her qualifications must be exceptional." Daniel's jaw tightened fractionally. "Vanessa has been involved in Luminary's strategic operations for years, far beyond her official title." "Yes, I gathered that from your conversation at my birthday party," I replied, keeping my tone light despite the twist of anger I still felt at the memory. The transition plan you two had developed seemed quite comprehensive. He had the grace to look momentarily discomfited before regaining his composure. I didn't ask you here to discuss Vanessa or our personal situation. Then why did you? Surely not to congratulate me on Meridian's recent successes. My drink arrived, providing a brief respite from the tension. I took a deliberate sip, meeting his gaze steadily over the rim of my glass. I wanted to talk to you directly about NextGen, he said finally. More specifically, about why we acquired them. This wasn't what I had expected. I'm reasonably certain I understand why. Meridian announces an aggressive push into the consumer market, so Luminary acquires a consumer security company to block our strategy. Transparent, if somewhat reactionary. That's the surface narrative, Daniel acknowledged, surprising me with his candor. But there's more to it than competitive positioning. I studied him carefully, trying to discern where this conversation was heading. I'm listening. Daniel glanced around the restaurant before leaning forward slightly. NextGen has been developing a new security protocol for smart home devices. Everything from thermostats to home security systems. They were on the verge of a major breakthrough that would have revolutionized that market segment. And naturally, Luminary wanted to own that. Technology, I filled in, still not understanding why this merited a face-to-face meeting. Yes, but not for the reasons you might think. He took a sip of his drink, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Their research uncovered a critical vulnerability in the foundational architecture used by virtually all consumer IoT devices. It's not just one company's products, it's an industry-wide exposure. My interest sharpened. If Daniel was being truthful, this was significant. How bad? Bad enough that if exploited, it could turn millions of smart home devices into a massive botnet capable of bringing down critical infrastructure. We're talking power grids, transportation systems, hospital networks, catastrophic disruption potential. I processed this information, my mind immediately racing to its implications. And Luminary acquired them. What? Patch the vulnerability? Daniel's expression was grim. That's where it gets complicated. The vulnerability is hardwired into the chip architecture used by almost all manufacturers. There's no simple patch. It would require a complete redesign and replacement of billions of devices already in homes across the country, which is financially and logistically impossible, I concluded. So you buried the research. He nodded once, confirming my suspicion. Temporarily. We're working with the chip manufacturers on a next-generation architecture that eliminates the vulnerability, but that's 24 months away at minimum. In the meantime, if this information becomes public, every hacker in the world would be exploiting it within days. I finished his thought. But why are you telling me this? Surely not out of some sense of civic duty. Daniel's expression hardened, slightly. Meridian's new consumer security initiative. You're planning to release a comprehensive diagnostic tool that scans for vulnerabilities in home networks. If that tool is thorough enough to identify this particular flaw, it could inadvertently make the vulnerability public, I realized, the pieces falling into place. And you believe we're on the verge of doing exactly that. Your team is good, Rebecca, particularly Sophia Chen. She's been looking at precisely the architecture components that contain this vulnerability. It's only a matter of time before she identifies it. I sat back, considering the implications. Daniel's concern appeared genuine, but years of marriage had taught me to look beyond his stated motivations. This vulnerability, if it became public and was exploited, the fallout would be catastrophic for the entire industry, including Luminary. Including every tech company with any connection to IoT devices, Daniel confirmed, but particularly those like Luminary and Meridian who operate in the security space. We'd be blamed for not preventing it. So your acquisition of NextGen wasn't just about blocking our market strategy. It was about containing this information. Precisely, I took another sip of my martini, processing. And now you're concerned that Meridian might inadvertently expose what you've worked to contain. Daniel nodded, watching me carefully. I'm asking you to direct your team away from that particular area of research. You don't have to explain why, just redirect their focus to other aspects of consumer security. I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or deception, but found only tense sincerity. This was not the Daniel who had plotted with Vanessa at my birthday party or who had attempted to intimidate me with network probes. This was Daniel the strategist, the problem solver I had admired during the early years of our marriage. Why? Didn't you simply have your legal team contact Meridian with a confidential security briefing? I asked, still suspicious of his motives for this personal approach. Because I couldn't risk creating a paper trail, even a confidential one, he replied. The very existence of this vulnerability is too dangerous to document, and He hesitated. I thought you would be more likely to take this seriously if I delivered the message personally, rather than through corporate channels. In other words, you're exploiting our personal history to achieve a business objective, I observed coolly. Daniel's expression flickered with something that might have been genuine hurt. I'm trying to prevent a potential disaster that would affect millions of people, Rebecca. If that means swallowing my pride and speaking to you directly after everything that's happened between us, so be it. I remained silent for a moment, weighing my options. The information Daniel had shared, if true, was indeed alarming. But trusting him felt dangerously like falling back into old patterns. I'll need verification, I said finally. Not documentation, but enough technical detail that my team can confirm the existence of this vulnerability without exposing it. That's reasonable, he conceded. I can arrange a secure briefing with our head of research. No documents, no recordings, just enough information to validate what I've told you. Assuming this checks out, what exactly are you proposing? That Meridian simply abandons a key component of our consumer strategy? Daniel shook his head. Not abandon, redirect. Focus on the software layer rather than the hardware architecture. You can still provide valuable protection without exposing the fundamental flaw. Our server returned to take our dinner orders, forcing a pause in the conversation. I ordered reflexively, my mind still processing the implications of what Daniel had shared. If he was telling the truth, this vulnerability represented both a genuine public safety concern and a significant business challenge. If he was lying or exaggerating, it was an elaborate attempt to derail Meridian's momentum in the consumer space. Once the server departed, I decided to shift the conversation slightly. Let's discuss something else while we wait for our food. Vanessa's new position, for instance. The industry appears quite surprised by her rapid ascension. Daniel's expression tightened. Her promotion was based on merit. Of course, I replied smoothly. Though I can't help but notice the timing coincided, precisely with Meridian's announcement of our small business security initiative. Almost as if you needed someone in that role who would unquestioningly implement your strategies, regardless of their business merit. You always did underestimate her, Daniel said, a defensive edge entering his voice. Vanessa has contributed significantly to Luminary's growth over the past 5 years. I'm sure she has, I replied, letting the double meaning hang in the air between us. Though her expertise seems remarkably focused on areas that align with your personal priorities. Daniel's fingers tightened around his glass. I didn't come here to discuss my COO's qualifications with you. No, you came to ask me to adjust Meridian's business strategy to protect Luminary's interests, I corrected him. Which makes your choice of operational leadership entirely relevant to this conversation. This isn't about protecting Luminary, he insisted, frustration evident in his tone. It's about preventing a potential catastrophe that would affect the entire industry and millions of consumers. Our food arrived, providing another brief respite from the increasing tension. As we began eating, I decided to approach from a different angle. Tell me about the government contracts, I said casually, watching his reaction carefully. Daniel's fork paused midway to his mouth, his expression momentarily unguarded. What about them? Systematic overbilling, I clarified. Roughly $40 million over 3 years, carefully structured to stay just below the thresholds that would trigger automatic audits. He set his fork down slowly, his face settling into the controlled mask I knew well from our marriage, the expression he wore when calculating exactly how much to reveal. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, I countered calmly. Meridian provides security for several oversight agencies, Daniel. The patterns are there for anyone who knows where to look. A muscle twitches in his jaw. If you had actual evidence of what you're suggesting, you would have taken it to the authorities already. Perhaps I'm still gathering that evidence, I suggested. Or perhaps I'm weighing the implications of exposing such information, much like you're concerned about the IoT vulnerability. Daniel studied me, reassessing the conversation and his approach. Are you threatening me, Rebecca? Not at all, I replied mildly. I'm simply pointing out that we both possess information that could significantly impact each other's companies. That creates a certain equilibrium, doesn't it? I came to you in good faith about a genuine security concern, he said, his voice hardening. And you're turning it into leverage for whatever game you're playing. That's an interesting perspective from someone who was plotting his divorce strategy at his wife's birthday party, I observed, feeling a flash of the anger I'd been carefully controlling. Forgive me if I'm not immediately convinced of your good faith. Daniel set down his napkin, his meal barely touched. The vulnerability is real, Rebecca. Whatever you think of me personally, whatever you believe about my motives, that fact remains unchanged. If Meridian inadvertently exposes it, the consequences won't discriminate between our companies. I acknowledged the truth in his statement, with a slight nod. I'll have my team verify what you've told me. If it checks out, we'll adjust our approach appropriately. Thank you, he said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Don't thank me yet, I cautioned. This doesn't change anything between us personally, and it doesn't mean Meridian is backing away from competing aggressively with Luminary. I wouldn't expect it to, he replied, signaling for the check. Though I had hoped this conversation might establish a certain professional respect, despite our personal circumstances. The server brought the bill, which Daniel immediately reached for. I placed my hand on it first, sliding it toward me. Meridian will cover this. Consider it a good faith gesture. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a reluctant nod of acknowledgement. As I signed the bill, I felt Daniel watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between respect and regret. We walked out of the restaurant together, maintaining a careful distance as the valet brought our respective cars. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the charged atmosphere of our dinner. I'll have my head of research contact your office tomorrow to arrange the briefing, Daniel said as we waited. Have them coordinate with Zoe, I replied. And, Daniel, if this vulnerability turns out to be less catastrophic than you've described, or if this is an attempt to derail Meridian's consumer strategy, I won't be as measured in my response. He met my gaze directly for the first time that evening. It's exactly as I've described. I give you my word. Your word, I repeated, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Like the vows you gave me 12 years ago? Daniel flinched almost imperceptibly. I deserved that, he acknowledged quietly. But in this case, my concern is genuine. This isn't about us, or even about our companies. Some things are bigger than corporate competition or personal grievances. My car arrived first, saving me from having to respond. As I slid into the back seat, Daniel stepped forward, his expression suddenly urgent. Rebecca, he said quickly, keeping his voice low. Watch Vanessa carefully. Her agenda may not align with what you think. Before I could ask what he meant, he stepped back, his face resuming its professional mask as his own car pulled up. I closed my door, puzzled by his cryptic warning, and uncertain whether it was yet another manipulation or a genuine moment of what? Concern? Conscience? As my driver pulled away from the curb, I glanced back to see Daniel standing motionless, on the sidewalk, watching my departure with an unreadable expression. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of what might have been nostalgia for simpler times, before betrayal, before corporate rivalry, before I discovered the depths of his capacity for deception. I pushed the feeling aside. Whatever game Daniel was playing, I needed to maintain absolute clarity. Too much was at stake, not just my personal dignity or professional reputation, but potentially the security of millions of people if what he'd told me about the IoT vulnerability was accurate. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian earlier than usual, determined to verify Daniel's claims before making any decisions about our consumer security initiative. I called Michael Torres and Sophia Chen to my office for a confidential briefing. "I need you to confirm something for me," I began once the door was closed. "Without documentation or creating any kind of digital trail, this stays completely off the record." They exchanged puzzled glances but nodded their agreement. "I've received information about a potential critical vulnerability in the chipset architecture used by most IoT devices," I explained, watching their reactions carefully, specifically in the secure enclave that manages encryption keys. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "The ARM Trust Zone implementation?" "Yes," I confirmed, relieved that her reaction suggested Daniel hadn't been bluffing. "I need to know if this is on your radar, and if so, how close you are to documenting it in our consumer diagnostic tool." Michael looked concerned. "We've been exploring that area, but we haven't fully mapped the potential vulnerabilities yet. Sophia's team has flagged some anomalies in the secure enclave's memory management, but we're still investigating." "I've had suspicions about the architecture for months," Sophia admitted. "The way it handles secure key storage has always seemed problematic to me. But without direct access to the proprietary implementation details, it's been difficult to confirm my theories." I nodded slowly. If this vulnerability exists as described, and if it became public knowledge before a solution was available, what would be the potential impact? Sophia didn't hesitate. "Catastrophic. If there's a fundamental flaw in the secure enclave, it would compromise every device using that architecture. Billions of devices worldwide could be weaponized into the largest botnet ever created, which could then be used to attack critical infrastructure," I concluded, echoing Daniel's warning. "Exactly," Michael confirmed. "Power grids, financial systems, healthcare networks, they would all be vulnerable to unprecedented distributed denial of service attacks." I made my decision. "I need you to redirect your research away from that specific architectural component, effective immediately. Focus instead on software-level vulnerabilities that we can address without exposing potential hardware flaws." "May I ask where this information came from?" Michael questioned carefully. I considered how much to reveal. "A confidential source with direct knowledge of the issue. You'll be receiving a secure briefing with additional technical details tomorrow. But for now, I need your absolute discretion on this matter." They both nodded, though I could see the questions in their eyes. As they left my office, I contemplated Daniel's warning from the previous night. "Watch Vanessa carefully. Her agenda may not align with what you think." What had he meant? Was he suggesting that Vanessa had her own ambitions beyond her relationship with him? Or was it another attempt to manipulate me, to create distrust within Luminary's leadership that might benefit him in some way? As I pondered these questions, Zoe entered with the morning's press briefing. "You might want to see this," she said, handing me a tablet open to a financial news site. The headline made my breath catch: "Luminary Technologies under federal investigation for contract irregularities." I quickly scanned the article, which, cited anonymous sources claiming that the Department of Justice had opened a preliminary investigation into Luminary's government contract billing practices. The article specifically mentioned systematic overcharging that could amount to tens of millions of dollars, language eerily similar to what I had said to Daniel at dinner. But I hadn't initiated this investigation. I hadn't shared my suspicions with anyone except Catherine. As I continued reading, one paragraph in particular stood out. Sources close to the investigation suggest that the inquiry was triggered by documentation provided by a senior executive within Luminary itself. I sat back, stunned by the implication. Someone inside Luminary had reported the contract fraud to federal authorities. And given the timing, immediately following Vanessa's promotion and my dinner with Daniel, the list of potential whistleblowers was intriguingly short. Perhaps Daniel's cryptic warning about Vanessa's agenda hadn't been manipulated after all. Perhaps it had been the closest thing to honesty he was capable of offering. The news of Luminary's federal investigation exploded across the technology sector by midday. Industry analysts were already speculating about the potential impact on the company's government contracts, which represented nearly 40% of their annual revenue. Luminary's stock had dropped 12% by the time markets closed, with after-hours trading pushing the decline further. I spent the day in a series of emergency meetings, first with Meridian's legal team to ensure we maintained appropriate distance from the investigation, then with our marketing department to determine how, or whether, to address questions about our competitors' troubles. This creates a significant opportunity for us, Rachel Winters argued during our strategy session. Government agencies with Luminary contracts will be looking for alternatives, concerned about potential service disruptions. It's certainly an opening, I agreed, but we need to be careful about how we approach it. Being perceived as opportunistic or gloating could backfire, especially given my personal connection to the situation. James Parsons nodded thoughtfully. We should position ourselves as a stable, ethical alternative without directly referencing Luminary's troubles. Let the contrast speak for itself. By late afternoon, I was finally alone in my office, contemplating the day's developments and Daniel's strange warning about Vanessa. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Have you seen the news? Call me ASAP." I dialed her immediately. "Please." "Tell me you had nothing to do with this," she said without preamble when she answered. "I didn't," I assured her. "The timing is suspicious, but I didn't initiate this investigation or provide any information to authorities." "Then who did?" The question hung in the air between us. The article mentioned a senior executive at Luminary. That's a very small pool of suspects. "I know," I replied, lowering my voice, although I was alone in my office. "And here's where it gets interesting. Daniel warned me about Vanessa last night." "Daniel warned you? When did you speak to Daniel?" Catherine's surprise was evident. I filled her in on our dinner meeting, the IoT vulnerability, and Daniel's cryptic parting words. "So, you think Vanessa might have reported the contract fraud?" Catherine asked, skepticism clear in her tone. "The same Vanessa who was plotting with Daniel to divorce you and take over your role at Luminary? That makes no sense, Becca." It didn't to me either, until I started thinking about the timing. Vanessa becomes COO, gaining access to higher-level financial information. Then, almost immediately, evidence of contract fraud surfaces at the DOJ. But she was involved with Daniel. Why would she undermine him like this? I considered the question carefully. Maybe their relationship isn't as solid as it appeared at my birthday party. Or maybe this is part of a larger strategy I'm not seeing. Yet. Or maybe, Catherine suggested, Daniel is playing you again, creating suspicion about Vanessa to distract you from whatever he's really doing. I couldn't dismiss the possibility. Daniel was masterful at misdirection, especially when cornered. That's certainly possible. But this investigation is real, and the information had to come from somewhere. "Be careful, Becca," Catherine warned. You're in the middle of corporate warfare with people who've already proven they'll betray you without hesitation. Don't let your guard down because Daniel shared some apparently genuine concern about a security vulnerability. Trust me, my guard is firmly up, I assured her. But I need to understand what's really happening if I'm going to navigate Meridian through this. After ending the call, I turned to my computer and began discreetly researching Vanessa Palmer's background, looking for anything that might illuminate her motivations. The public information was sparse: an undergraduate degree in business administration from Penn State, 5 years at a consulting firm specializing in operational efficiency, then her position as Daniel's executive assistant for the past 6 years. Nothing in her background suggested someone who would become a federal whistleblower. Yet something about the situation continued to nag at me. Daniel's warning had seemed genuine, a momentary break in his carefully maintained facade. My phone rang, displaying Meridian's security desk. "Ms. Harrington, there's Vanessa Palmer here, asking to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite persistent." I froze, genuinely shocked. "Vanessa, here at Meridian? Did she say what this is regarding?" "No, ma'am. She only said it's urgent and confidential." I considered my options quickly. Meeting with Luminary's newly appointed COO, who also happened to be my husband's mistress, was risky from both personal and professional perspectives, but the potential information value was too significant to ignore. "Please escort her to the secure conference room on the executive floor," I instructed, "and have Michael Torres join us there immediately." I wouldn't meet with Vanessa alone. Not only would having Michael present provide a witness to whatever she might say, but his technical expertise would be valuable if this conversation somehow related to the IoT vulnerability Daniel had mentioned. When I entered the conference room, Vanessa was already seated, her posture rigid with tension. She looked different from when I'd last seen her at my birthday party, more polished in her tailored navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. The transformation, from executive assistant to C-suite executive, was visually complete, though her nervously tapping fingernails betrayed her discomfort. "Vanessa," I greeted her neutrally, taking a seat across the table. "This is an unexpected visit." "I know," she replied, her voice steadier than I had anticipated. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Michael Torres, our CTO, will be joining us," I informed her, watching carefully for her reaction. A flicker of concern crossed her face. "What I have to discuss is extremely sensitive. Is his presence necessary?" "Yes," I said simply, offering no further explanation. Michael entered a moment later, nodding professionally to Vanessa before taking a seat beside me. "Ms. Palmer." "Now," I began, once he was settled, "what brings Luminary's new COO to Meridian's offices on the day a federal investigation into your company is announced? I can't imagine Daniel approved this visit." Vanessa's expression tightened at the mention of Daniel. "He doesn't know I'm here. And if he did—" She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. "Go on," I prompted when she hesitated. "I need to be direct," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm the one who provided information to the Justice Department about the contract fraud." Though I had suspected as much, hearing her confess it so bluntly was startling. "Why tell me this? Whistleblower protections exist for a reason." "Because the investigation is just the beginning," she replied, her voice dropping slightly. "There's more, much more, and I need protection that goes beyond what the federal government can provide." I exchanged a quick glance with Michael before returning my focus to Vanessa. "What kind of protection, and from what, exactly?" "From Daniel," she said, her composure cracking slightly. "And from what he's involved with. The contract fraud is just a small part of a much larger situation." "The IoT vulnerability," Michael suggested, speaking for the first time. Vanessa's eyes widened in surprise. "He told you about that? When?" "Last night," I confirmed. "He was concerned Meridian might inadvertently expose it." She gave a short, bitter laugh. Of course he was. But did he tell you that Luminary has been quietly selling access to that vulnerability to select clients for the past 6 months? I felt the blood drain from my face. What? Daniel identified the vulnerability in NextGen's research over a year ago, before the acquisition, Vanessa continued, her words coming faster now. But instead of working to fix it, he recognized its potential as a surveillance tool. Certain government agencies would pay extraordinary sums for undetectable access to millions of homes and businesses. Michael leaned forward, his expression grave. Are you suggesting Luminary has been deliberately exploiting a critical security vulnerability for profit? Not Luminary officially, Vanessa clarified. A separate entity called Obsidian Protocol, which operates with no visible connection to Luminary, but is controlled entirely by Daniel and 2 board members. The implications were staggering. If what Vanessa was saying was true, Daniel wasn't just guilty of contract fraud. He was facilitating what could amount to the largest unauthorized surveillance operation in history. These are extraordinary claims, I said carefully. What evidence do you have? Enough to concern the Justice Department, she replied, but not enough to fully expose the operation without putting myself at significant risk. That's why I'm here. What exactly do you want from Meridian? I asked, still wary of her motivations despite the apparent bombshell she was dropping. Technical, expertise to document the vulnerability comprehensively, legal protection while I continue gathering evidence, and she hesitated briefly. A position once this is over. I can't stay at Luminary, and no other company in the industry will touch me after I've taken down one of the sector's leading firms. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Why should I trust you, Vanessa? The last time we were in the same room, you were plotting with my husband to divorce me and take my place, both professionally and personally. For the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. I know how that must have sounded to you, but my relationship with Daniel has been complicated. I've been gathering evidence against him for nearly a year, since I first discovered the Obsidian Protocol documents. Yet you accepted a promotion to COO just days ago, I pointed out. That doesn't suggest someone looking to expose wrongdoing. The promotion gave me access to the final pieces I needed, she countered. Information I couldn't reach as his executive assistant, no matter how close our relationship appeared to. Michael cleared his throat. If I may, the technical details you've shared about the vulnerability align with what we've independently identified. That lends some credibility to your claims. I nodded acknowledgement but maintained my skeptical posture. Even if everything you're saying is true, Vanessa, why come to me? There are other companies, other approaches that don't involve seeking help from the wife your boss is divorcing. Because you're the only one with both the technical resources and the personal motivation to see this through, she replied bluntly, and because I know you're honorable. You won't exploit the vulnerability the way Daniel has, even though you could. Her assessment was accurate, which made me even more suspicious of her motives. How convenient that you've developed such faith in my character, after participating in discussions about how I would never understand what you and Daniel were building at Luminary. Vanessa had the grace to look ashamed. I said a lot of things to maintain Daniel's trust while I gathered evidence, things I'm not proud of. But right now, that's irrelevant compared to what's at stake. I considered her words carefully. Working with Vanessa would be complicated on multiple levels, personally, professionally, legally. Yet if her claims about Obsidian Protocol were true, the ethical implications of inaction were unacceptable. Need to consider this carefully, I said finally, and consult with our legal team about the parameters of any potential collaboration. I understand, Vanessa nodded, but please don't take too long. The federal investigation into the contract fraud has put Daniel on alert. He'll be working to cover his tracks on the Obsidian Protocol operation as we speak. Where can we reach you securely? Michael asked. Not at any known number or address, she replied, sliding a small encrypted phone across the table. This has a secure messaging app that can't be traced back to either of us. It's how I've been communicating with my contact at Justice. After Vanessa left, escorted discreetly out through a service entrance, Michael and I remained in the conference room, processing what we'd heard. "Do you believe her?" he asked finally. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Parts of her story are verifiable. The vulnerability exists. The federal investigation is real. But her motivations remain murky at best. The technical details she provided about how they're exploiting the vulnerability were disturbingly plausible," Michael noted. "If Luminary, or this Obsidian Protocol entity, has indeed operationalized this for surveillance purposes, it represents an unprecedented security breach." I nodded, my mind racing with implications. "We need to verify as much of her story as possible before making any decisions. Have your team discreetly look into Obsidian Protocol without revealing what we're searching for. And if we confirm her allegations, what then?" It was a critical question. Exposing Daniel's operation would have far-reaching consequences for Luminary, for the industry, for national security, and yes, for me personally. But allowing it to continue would be unconscionable. "Then we do what's right," I said simply, regardless of the personal complications. Michael nodded and left to begin the verification process, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared out, the window at the Manhattan skyline, contemplating how completely my life had transformed in the weeks since my birthday party. From trophy wife to CEO to potential whistleblower in a massive surveillance scandal, each role further removed from the carefully constructed identity I had maintained during my marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "We need to talk. Urgently. Not about us." The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Had he somehow learned of Vanessa's visit to Meridian? Was this another attempt to manage the narrative? To get ahead of whatever revelations she might have shared? I didn't respond immediately, instead calling Catherine to fill her in on this latest development. "Let me get this straight," she said, after I'd explained Vanessa's visit. "Your husband's mistress, who is now COO of his company, claims she's been gathering evidence against him for a year and wants your help to expose his illegal surveillance operation. This sounds like the plot of a bad spy novel, Becca." "I know how it sounds," I acknowledged, "and I'm maintaining healthy skepticism. But the technical details align with what we already know about the vulnerability. Even if the vulnerability part is true, that doesn't mean her story about Daniel selling access to it is accurate. This could be an elaborate setup." "To what end?" Catherine sighed. "I don't know, but the whole thing feels too convenient. Vanessa as the righteous whistleblower was not on my bingo card for how this situation would unfold." "Mine either," I admitted. "But we're verifying everything we can before taking any action." "And Daniel's sudden urgent text?" "I haven't responded yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Meet him somewhere public," Catherine advised, "and have someone from your team monitoring remotely. If he and Vanessa are somehow working together to manipulate you—" "That seems unlikely given the federal investigation she apparently triggered," I interjected. "Maybe, maybe not. But you need to protect yourself, Becca. This has escalated far beyond a messy divorce or corporate rivalry." After ending the call, I finally responded to Daniel's text. "Peninsula Hotel lobby. 7 p.m. Bring only information, not allegations." His reply came seconds later. "I'll be there. This isn't what you think." I wondered what he imagined I was thinking. That he was running an illegal surveillance operation exploiting a critical security vulnerability? That his COO and mistress had turned whistleblower against him? That our entire industry was about to be upended by revelations that could trigger congressional inquiries and criminal investigations? Whatever he believed I knew or suspected, tonight's meeting would reveal whether Daniel was still the brilliant strategist I had married, or whether the facade was finally crumbling, exposing something far darker beneath. As I prepared to leave the office, Zoe appeared at my door with a concerned expression. "Ms. Harrington, there's something you should know before you go. We've detected unusual access patterns in our network, someone attempting to view your calendar and communications." "Luminary again?" I asked, immediately alert. "No," she replied, her concern deepening. "The attempts are coming from inside Meridian. Someone with high-level access is monitoring your activities." The implications sent a chill through me. If I couldn't trust my own team while navigating this increasingly dangerous situation, my position was even more precarious than I had realized. "Can you identify who?" I asked quietly. "Not yet," Zoe admitted. "But Michael Torres is investigating personally. He'll have answers by morning." I thanked her for the information, my mind already racing with possibilities. Who within Meridian would have reason to monitor me? Was it possible that Daniel had a source inside my company? Or was someone else playing a game I hadn't yet identified? As I left for my meeting with Daniel, I felt an uncomfortable sense that I was being watched from multiple directions, caught in a web of surveillance and counter-surveillance where allies and enemies were increasingly difficult to distinguish. Whatever Daniel wanted to discuss tonight, one thing was becoming abundantly clear. The stakes in our corporate chess game had escalated dramatically, and the next few moves would determine far more than the fate of our marriage or our respective companies. 6 months after my fateful birthday party, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office at Meridian, watching rain streak down the glass as the Manhattan skyline disappeared into gray mist. So much had changed, yet in some ways everything had come full circle. "Ms. Harrington," Zoe's voice came through the intercom. "They're ready for you in the conference room." "Thank you, Zoe. I'll be right there." I gathered the folders from my desk, the final documentation of what had become known in industry circles as the Obsidian Protocol scandal. Today's meeting would close this chapter definitively, both professionally and personally. The conference room held an unlikely gathering: Michael Torres and our legal team from Meridian, 2 Justice Department officials, Lawrence Chen, who had returned temporarily from retirement to help navigate the crisis, and most surprisingly, Vanessa Palmer, now operating under a formal immunity agreement. Daniel was conspicuously absent, as he had been since his arrest 3 months ago. "The plea agreement has been finalized," announced Diane Matsuda, sliding copies across the table. "Daniel will serve 4 years in a minimum security facility, forfeit approximately 60% of his assets, and be barred from executive positions in publicly traded companies for 10 years. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The man I had once loved, built a life with, and later discovered plotting against me at my own birthday party, had fallen spectacularly from grace. The surveillance operation had been even more extensive than Vanessa had initially suggested, with at least a dozen government agencies and 3 foreign entities purchasing backdoor access through Obsidian Protocol. "And Meridian's position?" I asked, turning to Diane. "Fully protected," she confirmed. "Your cooperation has been formally recognized as instrumental to the investigation. The SEC has issued a statement commending Meridian's ethical leadership. It had been a delicate dance, helping federal authorities dismantle Obsidian Protocol while ensuring Meridian wasn't tainted by association through my marriage to Daniel. The fact that I had been kept entirely in the dark about his illegal operations had been thoroughly established, though the personal humiliation of having to prove my ignorance still stung. "What about the vulnerability itself?" asked one of the justice officials. Michael Torres responded confidently. "The coordinated patch deployment has reached 87% of affected devices globally. The remaining unpatched systems have been isolated from critical infrastructure networks. The threat has been effectively neutralized." Lawrence Chen nodded approvingly. "Impressive work, especially given the scale of the problem. Meridian had led the industry-wide effort to address the vulnerability without causing public panic, a complex technical and public relations achievement that had significantly enhanced our reputation and market position." In an ironic twist, what Daniel had exploited for illegal profit had ultimately strengthened Meridian's standing as an industry leader. As the meeting concluded and the participants filled out, Vanessa lingered behind, approaching me with visible hesitation. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly, "for believing me when you had every reason not to." I studied her face, still unsure of my feelings toward this woman who had been both my husband's accomplice and the catalyst for his downfall. "I believed the evidence, not necessarily you," I replied honestly. "But it seems your information was accurate, if not your initial motivations." She accepted this with a small nod. "Fair enough. I wanted to let you know I'm leaving New York. The immunity agreement restricts me from working in cybersecurity, but I've been offered a teaching position at UCLA. A fresh start," I observed. "Something like that." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "He wasn't always the man you discovered that night at your party. I think you know that." "I do," I acknowledged, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. "But we are all ultimately defined by our choices, not our potential." After Vanessa left, I returned to my office, where Catherine was waiting with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Is it done?" she asked, already pouring. "It's done," I confirmed, accepting a glass. "Daniel took the plea deal. Meridian's position is secure. The industry has implemented the security patches." "Then we are celebrating," she declared, raising her glass. "To my brilliant sister, who turned betrayal into triumph." We clinked glasses, and I allowed myself to feel, if not exactly happiness, then a profound sense of accomplishment. In 6 short months, I had transformed from a woman discovering her husband's betrayal at her birthday party to the CEO who had led an industry through crisis while helping bring down a major criminal enterprise. "Have you seen the latest market reports?" Catherine asked, setting down her glass to pull up data on her tablet. "Meridian's stock has more than doubled since you took over. You've outperformed every competitor in the sector, including what's left of Luminary." It was true. While Luminary had survived under new leadership, it was a shadow of its former self, having lost most of its government contracts and much of its senior talent. Several of their best engineers and developers now worked for Meridian, attracted by our enhanced reputation and more ethical culture. Not bad for someone who supposedly had never run anything more complex than a household social calendar, Catherine added with a smirk, quoting Daniel's dismissive assessment from months earlier. I smiled despite myself. He never did understand my capabilities. His loss, the business world's gain. Catherine raised her glass again. "So what's next for the formidable Rebecca Harrington?" I moved to the window, watching as the rain began to clear, sunlight breaking through the clouds to illuminate the city below. "Professionally, expansion. We're acquiring 3 smaller security firms to strengthen our consumer division. The board has approved the strategy unanimously." "And personally?" Catherine pressed gently. I considered the question. The divorce had been finalized amid Daniel's legal troubles, with financial settlements rendered largely moot by the government seizures of his assets. I had attended exactly 1 meeting with him after his arrest, a brief, tense encounter where he had vacillated between accusations and appeals for understanding. I had offered neither absolution nor condemnation, only a clear-eyed acknowledgement that our chapter was closed. "Personally," I said, turning back to my sister with a genuine smile, "I'm exactly where I need to be. Leading a company I believe in, surrounded by people I trust, and no longer defining myself through someone else's expectations." As Catherine left to meet friends for dinner, I remained at the window, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a shattered champagne flute and whispered plans on my birthday. The betrayal that was meant to diminish me had instead revealed strengths I had forgotten I possessed. Daniel and Vanessa had seen me as an obstacle to their ambitions, a decorative accessory easily discarded when inconvenient. Instead, I had become the architect of their downfall, not through vindictiveness, but through a commitment to truth and ethical leadership. The sun had fully emerged now, bathing the city in golden late-afternoon light. I picked up my phone and deleted the final calendar reminder of my marriage, the annual alert for Daniel's birthday next week. Some chapters were worth closing completely. Tomorrow, Meridian will announce our new acquisitions. Next month, we will launch our revolutionary consumer security platform. And I would continue building the life and legacy I had always been capable of creating, one that had been waiting for me all along, beneath the shadow of a marriage that had both defined and confined me. The irony wasn't lost on me. In plotting to exclude me from their future, Daniel and Vanessa had inadvertently pushed me toward claiming my own, one far greater than anything we might have built together. Sometimes, betrayal becomes the unexpected gift that sets you free. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.